This is Ruben from Dubb, and I am proud to announce Rick Barrera onto the stage with me. Today, we are going to be talking about a topic that he's very passionate about. And I think you've been involved in this topic since probably 1981 or before, based on the copyright that I see on some of your slides, which is very, very interesting to hear. You are in beautiful San Diego in California, just like me. This idea of collaborative selling is powerful, and we have the expert here to talk about it. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here and be your guide, Rick. If you could just start with a short intro, and let's get into this topic.
Yeah.
Tell me about yourself.
So, well, I started selling when I was really little. When I was 6, I signed up. I was in Cub Scouts, and I got a Boys Life magazine. And in the back, they had an ad that said, earn big money. And I thought, yeah, that's me, big money. So I sent away for the catalog. I didn't know what it was, but they sent me a Christmas card catalog. And so I started selling Christmas cards door to door when I was 6 to all my neighbors. I bugged them. I was like Dennis the Menace. And then in the spring, the company sent me a seed catalog. So I started selling seeds door to door. And I just thought it was fun and cool and interesting. And then I had a whole series of commission sales jobs and sold cameras, guns, motorcycles, stereos, sporting goods, audio visual equipment, stainless steel tubing and pipe, jewelry, all kinds of business to business things. And I've been a sales trainer for the last 20 years.
Phenomenal. So what have you learned about collaboration? Tell us about collaborative selling.
Well, when I was selling Christmas cards, I was basically pitching the whole time. And, I learned over time as I got older that people didn't really appreciate the pitch. And so I started taking some selling courses and learning different things. And I sort of came upon this whole idea of asking questions and what are the right questions to ask and what's the right sequence to ask them in. And then Tony Alessandra and I got together and we wrote a book called Non-Manipulative Selling that became a bestseller back in the 80s. And then our sequel to that was Collaborative Selling. And the whole philosophy is really, sort of the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you'd like to be done unto, right? And so we looked at that and we said, instead of all this pitching, what if we just really tried to help people solve problems? And so that's really what collaborative selling is. It's coming together to collaborate. And what we're looking for is there fit, right? Sometimes if I call on you, Ruben, there's a fit, and sometimes there's not. And it's okay either way, right? So I'm just trying to find, is there a fit? Can I help you? If I can be of assistance, if we can collaborate together, if we can make beautiful music together, then let's do that. And if we can't, I'll move on to somebody else. So that's the whole foundation behind collaborative selling. So one of the fundamental foundations is maps, right? So if I showed you that map of Charlotte, is the map Charlotte? That's for you, Ruben.
Crickets.
No. So
it looks like Charlotte to me.
Well, but the map itself is not the city of Charlotte, right?
The map
surrounding area.
The map itself is not the city of Charlotte, correct? This is simply a diagram, right?
Right. It's a representation, right? So correct. We all have mental maps, which is the next slide. We all have mental maps. You have a mental map, which is the world according to Ruben. I have a mental map, the world according to me. When you go out to see a client, it's, they have a mental map that's the world according to them. So that's the first thing we have to understand is if we're going to be selling to them, if we're going to be helping them, if we're going to be collaborating with them, then the most critical thing is we have to be on their mental map. So if you look at the next slide, it's a slide of Dallas and the surrounding area. Now take a look at that slide and then go to the next slide. Okay, that's a map of Dallas and the surrounding area. Now, those two slides are completely different. Those two maps are completely different, right? But the question is, are they both valid maps? And the answer is yes. So they can have, one sort of version of the truth, and you can have your version of the truth, and they can both be valid. But if we're going to be selling to them, then we need to learn to use their map. So how do we do that? How do we get on their map? How do we stay on their map? It's questions. 97% of the time, you do not persuade with statements. You persuade with questions. Only 3% of the time can you persuade somebody with a statement. So if it's true that only 3% of the time you can persuade somebody with a statement, why ever make a statement? Why would you ever talk, right? Why would you ever pitch? Because people aren't persuaded by that. They're persuaded by questions. So what I'm going to talk about today is the 5 sets of questions that you need to ask. Back up. 5 sets of questions we need to ask and the right order in which to ask them. So the first question we're always going to ask is the same. Could you tell me a little bit about your business? Could you tell me a little bit about your situation? Right? Tell me about what's going on. And we're going to just ask them to start wherever they think it's most important. Sometimes I ask this question and people say, well, what do you want to know? I say, well, what do you think is most important? And they'll start. And then once they've told me something, they've laid out a scenario for me. Well, here's what's going on in my business. Here's where we are. Here's what we've done. Here's where we're going, whatever it is, right? They've said things that I don't understand. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clarify. I'm going to ask a clarifying question. And the clarifying question is going to be, what do you mean by? Next slide. What do you mean by? Okay, I call this the $1 million question. The reason I call it the $1 million question is because more than one time in my life I made $1 million by asking this question. And oftentimes more than once to the same client. I'll sometimes ask it 3, 4, 5, 10 times to do a real drill down to really understand exactly what they're talking about and exactly what they're trying to convey to me, because they are trying to convey information to us, but we don't always listen. So you'll jump ahead 2 slides. Let's say the client said to me, I've just got to figure out how to cut my costs right now. Now, what does the typical salesperson do when they hear that? Or are you not responding?
I think that what they do is if the prospect is saying that they want to cut their costs, I think that they hopefully find a way so that they can do that with their product or their service.
Exactly. They're reacting to the statement. They're trying to figure out, how do I cut your costs? How do I lower my prices? How do I sell to you when you're in a cost-cutting mode, right? They don't even know what that means. So when he says, I've just got to figure out how to cut my costs right now, what I'm going to do is ask a whole series of clarifying questions. Well, what do you mean by figure out? What do you mean by got to? Right? Got to could mean like I feel like I should, or it could be my boss told me I have to cut my costs by 15% by Friday. Right? Those are very different things. Well, what do you mean by cut my costs? Are you talking about, lowering inventory? Are you talking about lowering your staffing costs? Are you talking about, your purchasing cost? We don't know what we're talking about. And what do you mean by right now? Is that like in the next 15 minutes or over the next 2 years? So I'm going to ask a whole series of, what do you mean by right now? What do you mean by figure out? What do you mean by cut costs? What do you mean by just got to? And once he's answered that, now I can start to help him figure out how to move forward with that project or that initiative that he's got. And then maybe I fit into that, maybe I don't. Maybe this doesn't have anything to do with me. Maybe that's just what's top of mind for him right now. So that's the second type of question we're going to ask. The third type of question we're going to ask is an expanding question. So expanding questions you use to go wider once you have an established starting point. So you're going to say things like, next slide, tell me more about your project or whatever's going on. Next slide. You're going to say, in what ways are you impacted by your boss's mandate? Next slide. We're going to ask what, how, and why questions, right? We don't ask who, where, and when questions because they're closed-ended, right? So we don't get any information on a closed-ended question. So I don't want to waste my time asking that question. I want to ask a what, how, or why question, except we don't want to ask a why question, right? Next slide. We don't want to ask a why question. Why not? If I say to you, Ruben, why are you doing this interview at this time? Why are you using that microphone? Why are you using that headset? What are you doing, right? How does that feel?
I might say that it puts me in a situation where I have to figure out exactly what the reason is. If it's multiple reasons, it puts me in a situation where I have to feel comfortable. It forces me to be transparent, which I like. It really comes down to, is the person comfortable answering the question? And more importantly,
exactly.
do they know what the answer is?
Right. So instead of, it makes people uncomfortable when we ask why questions. It puts them on the spot. So instead of asking a why question, we're going to say, what prompts you to? Right. So if I said, hey, Ruben, what prompted you to pick that particular microphone? Right. You go, oh, well, a friend of mine recommended it, blah, 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 or it had great reviews or whatever. Right. You see what I'm saying? It's much easier to answer a what prompts you question. Right? What prompted you to schedule this at this time? Oh, well, I had other things in the morning and I got to do this, right? Right? It's not accusatory. So we ask what prompts your questions. Next slide. So supposing they said to you, well, we've brought together an experienced team for this Odyssey. So we could ask clarifying questions, right? We could say, what do you mean by an experienced team? But I want to expand now. I want to go broader. I want to go wider. So I'm going to say, well, gee, tell me more about your team. What prompted you to call it an Odyssey? How did you happen to bring these people together? Right? So they're going to give us narrative responses, and we're going to get lots of rich information from the expanding questions. And then we're going to move on to impact questions. So impact questions are, how's that going to impact you? If that were to happen, what impact would that have on the organization? What would the effect of that be? How would that feel? Who would be most impacted by that? What would the consequences be? So what most salespeople don't do is they don't slow down to dig in on all these things. They don't slow down to ask the clarifying questions. They don't take enough time to ask the expanding questions. And almost all of them skip the impact questions. And so when you ask these impact questions, so what would be the impact of this on your organization? How would that impact you personally? How does it impact your team? How does it impact the bottom line? Right? You start to understand the value of the solution or the value of the problem, right? So if they say, well, if I can't get this fixed, this is going to cost me millions. Well, okay, now any solution I have that's less than millions is a valuable solution. If I ask an impact question and they say, well, if we could get this right, if we could get the right structure in place, we probably could, double our revenues next year. Okay, well, again, now we've established the value of the solution in their mind. It doesn't matter what it is in my mind, because whose map are we on, right? We got to be on their map. So these impact questions really help us to establish the value of the solution or the opportunity that we're presenting. And then the last type of question we ask are plan, do, handle questions, right? Well, so let's do the impact question here. So he says to you, that's all right, go back. So he says, Go forward one more. So he says, we're reorganizing the team this month, right? What's the impact on you? How's the team going to feel about that? What's the result of the reorganization? How's that going to save you money? How's it going to, create more wealth for your organization? Whatever it is, right? So that's the impact question. And then we go to what I call plan, do, handle questions. So instead of me jumping in and pitching and saying, here's my solution to your problem, and let me pontificate about how brilliant I am and how I have all the solutions, I'm simply going to ask the question, so what's your plan for managing that opportunity? How are you going to put that in place to double your business? How are you going to solve that problem that's going to cost you millions? And one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to have a plan or they're not going to have a plan. Now, I can tell you about 80% of the time, they don't have a plan. So you say, well, what's your plan for solving that problem? They go, I don't know. That's why you're here. I was hoping you would have some ideas. Okay, now what's just happened at that moment, Ruben?
Well, I think there's some aspect of empowerment. There's some leverage that's created. There's an opportunity to provide value. There's
right, but they've just asked me for help, right?
Right. So that's the opportunity, right?
Right. So no longer am I the salesperson who came in to take their time and inflict my solution on them. Now I'm a consultant. They've said to me, hey, I don't have a solution. I don't have a plan. How can you help me?
Correct.
And now, we can collaborate. We can literally sit side by side and co-create a solution. And that's where the magic comes in, is in letting them come to the conclusion that they don't have a plan, they don't know what they're going to do, and they need help. So when they ask for your help, like if you know anything about your product or service at all, you should be able to solve their problem. If it's related, of course, you should be able to help them. The problem is, how do we get them to ask us for help? And this is how you do it with these five types of questions in this sequence, where they understand there's a problem, they've described the problem or the opportunity, they've talked about the impact on their company and on themselves, and then we say, okay, what's your plan? And they don't have one. And if they don't have a plan, they're going to be looking for one. Then now that's the easy way, right? We can start to collaborate. The other scenario is they say, oh, I have a plan. I'm going to do X. And all I do is ask a couple of more clarifying and expanding questions. And what I find is about 90% of the time, their plan falls apart. So they say, well, I'm going to hire more salespeople or whatever. And I say, oh, great. So, how are you going to do that? Well, I really don't know. Right? Or they'll say, well, I'm going to hire a headhunter, and then he's going to hire more salespeople. And I say, and how's that going to help you? And they go, well, I don't know, because they don't know how to train them. Or whatever it is, right? That, like, you get 2 or 3, 4 questions in, and the plan starts to fall apart. And once again, you say, so what are you going to do about that? And they go, I don't know. Can you help me? So that's basically the methodology. 5 types of questions, super simple.
What an unpacking. So let me ask you a couple of questions here. First of all, thank you for that. That's something that's complex that I think you presented in a very simplistic way. How much practice does it take? What does it require?
It takes a lot of practice.
Right? And how do we practice this type of mentality? That's what I'm curious.
Well,
about.
What I would start with is one question at a time. No, see, so the question on the screen is, would it be appropriate to say, what can I help you with? No, you don't want to do that, right? If as soon as you start stepping in and saying, how can I help you, or what can I help you with, or, can I help you, or whatever, you're pitching into no demand, right? You're trying to step into their space. You got to let them come to you. Some people say to me, well, what if you get to the end of the interview and they haven't asked you for help? I come back again and I ask more questions. I'm going to keep asking questions until they ask for my help. Sometimes that takes me 3 or 4 or 5 calls, and sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not, to go back, right? But when they ask for your help, you have a partner and you can collaborate. And it's a totally different relationship. And it's not you being a salesperson that's a pest, right? That's taking their time and trying to sell them things that they don't want or need. It's you helping them and collaborating with them and consulting with them. It's totally different, completely different methodology. So how do you start? You practice one question at a time. You make sure on every first call, you're saying, could you tell me a little bit about your business? And you're getting them to talk. When you've got that happening, then you practice clarifying. And I'll tell you, clarifying takes a lot of practice. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by the other thing? What do you mean by the other thing? You think you're bugging them. You think you're stupid. People say to me, I'm really going to go into a person and say, what do you mean by a mortgage? I'm in the mortgage business. How can I ask a stupid question like that? Because mortgages mean different things to different people. Are you asking me to hold the paper? Are you going to hold the paper? Is the bank going to hold the paper? Is there going to be a deposit or not a deposit? So how much down? I want to know. I want their version of it. I ask all kinds of questions that most people would be embarrassed to ask. They go, oh my God, I look like an idiot asking that question. I promise you, you ask those questions, you're going to learn what's in their head about that thing. I used to sell cameras. People used to come in all the time and they'd say, I need a lens. And I'd say, for the front of your camera. They'd say, yeah. And I'd sell them a filter. They called them lenses, but they were filters, right? You have to understand what's on their mental map. So once you got the clarifying down, then you practice the expanding. The expanding one is the hardest one because there's infinite expanding questions. You can ask, what about this? How do you do that? What prompts you to do this or that or the other thing? There's a million of those. So that one takes a lot of practice. Once you get that one down, then the impact questions and the plan to handle are pretty simple. So I would practice them in sequence one at a time until you get them mastered.
Tremendous. And where can we learn more about the program? How can we? I understand that you have an offer with a free copy of the book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I made it available. I have another company called partnerhere.com. It's for entrepreneurs who are trying to find partners and people to collaborate with them. But if you go to partnerhere.com, you can sign up for a free account, click the Learn tab and the free resources, and you can download a free copy of Collaborative Selling.
And then you have a website for your books, rickbarerabooks.com.
Do you like that name?
Love it.
Took me all week to figure it out.
It's a great one. And then Barrera.com is your go-to website. And then what's your most active social network? Is it LinkedIn or where are you at? Where can we see you?
Probably LinkedIn at this point. I'm about to launch a whole series of on entrepreneurship on TikTok and Instagram.
Beautiful.
But they aren't out yet. Another couple of weeks.
We will look forward to that. Well, Rick, I wanted to thank you for your time and stick around for some production notes. And once again, appreciate you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Ruben.